What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 98. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Got a couple announcements before I get into the show today. The first is I'm going to be speaking in Denver at the Liberty on the Rots event, 7 p.m. The 21st, this coming Wednesday. So if you're in the Denver area and you want to see me speak at a live event, we could chat. I'd love to meet some listeners of the show at that. Please think about showing up. I'll throw a link in the show notes page where you could register to attend the event. Also, we have the 100th episode of the show coming up this week, and I'm really stoked about that. Me and Will have a great interview lined up, and so you won't want to miss that. Just subscribe to the show somewhere. Video versions available at YouTube and at Odyssey. You could listen to the audio version anywhere people listen to podcasts, and the best place to find the show online is where it's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the news editor and write the daily news roundup, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle. One of the ways you could support the show and help yourself is by going to the show's sponsor, PalomaVerdeStore.org, and check out the great CBD products that Paloma Verde has to offer. They have a variety of CBD products that come in different forms: extracts, soft gels, gummies, also lotions and topicals. I really like the topicals to help relieve local pain. Will Porter likes their products that are infused with melatonin to help with insomnia. So you got a range of issues. You could check out PalomaVerdeStore.com and use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out and get yourself some great CBD products. Now I want to get into the show. So the first thing I have up today is the Adam Toledo shooting. This was in Chicago, where a 13-year-old boy, Adam Toledo, was unarmed, had his hands up, and was shot and killed by a police officer. I will be playing the video for anybody looking at the video version of the show here. I will have it on silent, just for the audio only people, and it is disturbing, so I wouldn't show it to kids. Anyways, you see the cop pull up. Two people must be having an interaction. You really can't tell what they're doing, and then the cop chases someone, you don't know who, down the alley. He pushes one person to the ground and continues to run after Adam, where he drops the gun, puts his hands up, and gets shot by the cop. Anyways, one of the things I noticed during the chase in this video is that the cop is swearing, using the F word and stuff like that, which, if you know de-escalation tactics, using that particular word isn't going to create any kind of de-escalation. And so it's a really disturbing situation, what you end up having with this shooting, and pretty clear that the officer made a mistake at best and murdered this kid intentionally at worst, but certainly ended up with this kid being killed. No word yet on if the cop will face any kind of charges. There's a couple different videos with this shooting. The only one that you could really see what happens in any substantial way is the cop's body camera. There's another video where you could see Adam run to the frame. It does look like he puts something down behind the fence, puts his hands up, and gets shot by the cop. But it is pretty far away, so you can make some assumptions on what happens, but I feel like it's kind of hard to tell from that angle. And then there is another officer, this officer's partner, who shows up and apprehends the other person in this scenario. And just even every cop whose body camera I watched this on was dropping F-bombs and stuff. It just, I think, probably goes to the unprofessionalism of the Chicago Police Department, that, these are supposed to be the people enforcing rules, running around swearing and screaming and shooting people, right? I think that's all part of the same culture, and I'm not just trying to, highlight them dropping F-bombs and stuff like that, but again, I think it just goes to show, like, what their mentality is. They're like these crazy cowboys out there running and shooting people down, and in this case it ends up being a 13-year-old kid. Whether the officer thought it was an honest mistake in the fact that, there could have been a light behind his hands, maybe that glared. I don't know, but at the same time, you told the kid to put his hands up. He put his hands up, and you blasted him anyways. It's just unacceptable, kind of itchy trigger finger thing that you absolutely can have with, a massive armed police force running around. There's thousands of Chicago cops, and if, even a small number of them have this itchy of a finger, it's going to create a lot of dead bodies. And so, there's a lot of disturbing layers to this story. I don't yet know if the officer is or will be charged. The last I saw from the police union, they were still standing by this officer, even though he again killed a little boy. Of course, the conservative crowd is going crazy, pointing at the family, saying that, this 13-year-old was doing something on the streets. Maybe it was a drug deal. It kind of, from what I was able to see, it kind of looks like maybe a drug deal situation, but I have no idea. And that was the cause for this, is the bad parenting. And so there's a lot of support system in this young man's life that went wrong, that he ends up gunned down on by a cop on the streets of Chicago with his hands in the air, that failed this kid. And certainly there may have been something, with parenting or in the family, why, he wasn't supervised in the middle of the night and had a gun. But at the same time, that doesn't have any relevance at all with the shooting. And he should be alive if it wasn't for the cop. So that's the story with Adam Toledo. There is another story of a young kid being shot and killed by police. It is Payton Ham, somewhere on the East Coast, I believe, either North Carolina or Maryland, and there was not body cam footage here. All we know is that he was a 16-year-old who had an airsoft gun, and the cop gunned that kid down as well. So we, have cops killing kids in the U.S. On a not infrequent basis, and it's just a real tragedy and a real problem that we have. We also have the officer who shot Jacob Blake. This was the man in Kenosha who was shot 7 times in the back and paralyzed not too long after the whole George Floyd thing happened. So his not death, but him being paralyzed, shot 7 times in the back by the cop, sparked massive protests in Kenosha that ended up, of course, with the Rittenhouse shooting. So that officer is now back on the streets, and they said that they found he did nothing wrong, which I disagree with. You shot the guy 7 times, but even if they concluded that, clearly you're not competent and capable to be a cop, even if you didn't technically violate the law in shooting Mr. Blake here, by the fact that you put yourself in the position that you needed to shoot and then shot the guy in the back 7 times. You're just not qualified for the job. It's a difficult job to have. It's a job that you have to, be able to think in a crisis situation, and Mr. Shepke here clearly can't do that, and so he should at the very least have been fired for this, and I would probably look more towards prosecution. But at the same time, it's really concerning that he is now back on the streets of Kenosha. I have another story here about the criminal justice system. This one titled from CBS News, "Man Freed After Nearly 32 Years in Prison." And they, play up that he craved one treat, strawberry ice cream. But really, this story is an absolute nightmare. So you have Crosby Green, who's a black man, and in 1989, there was a murder, and they put Mr. Green behind bars for that murder. There was no physical evidence, fingerprints, anything linking him at all to the murder, and it was only the testimony of 3 witnesses that put him behind bars. And those 3 witnesses now say that they were facing their own criminal justice system issues and were intimidated into pleading to, I'm guessing, get lighter sentences on whatever they were dealing with in the criminal justice system. So that's really disturbing. There was also 4 months after the murder happened, the two officers who initially investigated the murder went and I guess told the prosecutor, and the prosecutor wrote this down, that they thought that the woman who was with the man who was murdered was the one that was actually guilty of the killing. Their story didn't make sense, and that this was withheld from the defense. And I think that's probably exculpatory evidence, and you can't withhold exculpatory evidence. And because of that in 2018, his conviction was thrown out. Now, the bad news is that he remained in jail. Now, imagine this. You've been in jail for 30 years for a crime you didn't commit. They throw out the guilty conviction, and then they keep you in jail anyways, because I guess they were looking at, going through another trial. Although it doesn't seem like they would have the evidence. There is no evidence, but without the witnesses, then this would absolutely fall apart. Finally, in April of 2021, he was able to get released because he had a medical condition. And so all those things together, he's now released, but he's not even free. He's on parole. He has to meet with his parole. First thing you do when you get out of prison after 32 years for a crime you didn't commit, you got to go meet with your parole officer. This is absolutely absurd. And I'm sure one of the things here is that counties like to pressure people who have been wrongfully convicted and spend years in jail, because if you get them to do an Alford plea or something like this, where you get no more time served, you get out of jail, essentially everybody kind of winks and says, we know you didn't do it, but then you can't sue for wrongful imprisonment, and so it saves these counties a lot of money. So that could be what they're doing. Maybe they're trying to bully him into that. Hopefully, not only does he get out of jail and lives long enough to enjoy some substantial part of his life after spending 30 years in jail, but also he gets a lot of money from the people who did this. Again, I'm always on favor of taking the money from the pensions of the state employees who wrongfully led these people to be jailed, imprisoned, murdered, or whatever. So take the prosecutor who convicted him's money and give it to this man and let him live a very hopefully happy rest of his life. Let's see here. The next thing I have is there are no charges for the police officer who shot and killed Ashley Babbitt at the Capitol on January 6th. This is, I think, an important story just because it seemed to me like there were a lot of other options to go here, and that the cop had an itchy trigger finger and shot this woman in the neck. Of course, nobody's really pressuring for charges, and a lot of people who usually would be anti-police seem very happy that this woman ended up dying. Important to remember that on the 6th, Ashley Babbitt was the only person that was murdered, and then 3 other people had medical episodes and died, all of them being Trump supporters. We still don't know exactly what killed Capitol Police Officer Brian Sitnick. However, 2 people are charged with his assault, and they're not so far linking those assaults to his murder, and they just apparently sprayed something at him. Now, there are some disturbing things coming out of the trials for the Capitol protesters, and I know a lot of good journalists, and especially some very brave voices that typically, are on the left, Glenn Greenwald, Michael Tracy, have been making a big deal, and I think out of something important, and that is people have been writing articles saying that, taxpayers are funding the public defenders for these people who stormed the Capitol, or that there were people who crowdsourced their defense, and how terrible these things are. And, people having competent attorneys to defend them shouldn't be something that we oppose, even if we dislike the person being charged. You always want it to be a fair trial, and far too often people who don't have a lot of money could get railroaded in the justice system. One of the things happening is we have here an article from the LA Times titled "Uncharted Waters. Judges are banning some Capitol riot suspects from the internet." And we have a story, and they outline there's at least 5 cases now where judges have banned Capitol rioters either from the internet or from social media. Now, they highlight the case of this one particular woman, Gina Bilizangio, and she's a 52-year-old salon owner, and I guess her lawyer actually advocated for this in a way to get her out of prison, but there are other cases where this has happened, where the person has been outright banned from the internet. One of the disturbing things here is you're really, I think, getting into questions of freedom of speech and what people should be able to talk about. And certainly when you talk about the internet, just everyday life needs it. So many people use online banking, make all their payments online. If you are barred from the internet, I'm not sure how you could really communicate. Even a lot of times, like you use I use my Wi-Fi to make my cell phone calls. Can you even do that? Like these are real questions, and I don't think it's constitutional. I believe it was in 2017 there was a law in North Carolina, and it said that sex offenders couldn't use social media, and the Supreme Court did strike that down. And so it seems like there would be similar civil liberty violations with depriving these people of the internet. Although there's kind of a we could do whatever we want in response to the Capitol riot mentality among people in the state, some people in the media, and some fellow Americans. That's really problematic. Some good news. We have a bill introduced by several senators. It looks like bipartisan in both houses. You got Paul, Wyden, and then Reps DeFazio and Davis. And it is to end the Selective Service Act. And that is, of course, requires all young men in the United States to register for the draft when they turn 18. If you don't do this, you could get deprived of rights, including not be able to get like funding for college and stuff like that. There's a big problem that they have with the Selective Service Act right now because I believe it's either required to expand it to everyone, men and women, or to get rid of it altogether. There's a big push to get rid of it. I obviously think that's the right course. You're essentially requiring all young men to sign up to be potentially cannon fodder for the state and go and die in a war that they don't know about or believe in. And certainly, likely being from the ages of 18 to 26, very little of their life they've, been able to in any way of consequence participate in the political system that led to this war. So that's all some good news. Let's talk about the changing thing going on in Cuba here, as the head of the Cuba's Communist Party, Raul Castro, the longtime brother of Fidel. He was longtime, I believe, Fidel's defense minister. He has resigned from the most important political position in Cuba as, again, the head of the Communist Party, and is turning it over to younger members of the party. It isn't going strictly to the Castro family, although I do understand that some of the younger Castros, the next generation of Castros, do have some power still in the Communist Party, but not as much. Now, with what's happened in the past, let's say 6 years, where Obama started to open up relations with with Cuba, and then Trump rolled that back and really did a whole lot of damage, like to the Cuban economy and the people who went out and opened up business because they were getting new American tourism. I mean, it's a very, I guess, nice good weather island, not that far from the U.S. It would be a very popular U.S. tourist destination. A lot of those people built businesses and started businesses around American tourism, and then the U.S. got rid of it. And so we now have Biden in position where he could be like, my predecessor was an idiot. He rolled back something that not only was offering Americans a good opportunity, potentially businesses, cruises, stuff like that, helping the American economy, but also helping the Cuban people and people in Cuba who are entrepreneurial minded and want to go out and start businesses. And instead, the White House press secretary Jen Psaki said after the Castro stepped down that, again, it seems like a great time for the Biden administration to be able to say, as Cuba's changing, the U.S. policy is going to change. But they say it's not a priority for the Biden administration to change it. Not that it would take a long time to do or anything like that. A lot of it could be done through executive fiat. That's how Trump did it. But Biden isn't going to take the time to mess with it. So many presidents, and this isn't just a critique of Biden, it's a critique for everybody, including Trump, focus all their and have this idea that if they waste their political capital, is what they call it, on foreign policy at the beginning of the administration, they won't get their domestic agenda done. If you don't get the domestic agenda done, nobody's gonna vote for you. That's kind of the mantra that keeps us in the position that we're in, where presidents never want to change, or it's their excuse not to change foreign policy. Next up here, I want to talk about, and this is the main part I have for today's show, is the new round of sanctions the Biden administration put on the Russian government. It starts out with this clip here from Biden. It's about a minute and 10 seconds long, where he kind of just lays out the reasons that we're applying sanctions on Russia here.
I spoke with President Putin of Russia about the nature of our relationship, the relationship between our two countries. And I was candid, respectful. The conversation was candid and respectful. Two great powers with significant responsibility for global stability. And President Putin and I have had a significant responsibility to steward that relationship. I take that responsibility very seriously, as I'm sure he does. Russia and Americans are both proud and patriotic people. And I believe the Russian people, like the American people, are invested in a peaceful and secure future of our world. During the campaign for the presidency, I was unequivocal that if I was elected president, I'd respond to any attempt to influence our elections, the last election, and because elections are sacred. They're sovereign undertakings, and they're an expression of the will of the American people. And we cannot allow a foreign power to interfere in our democratic process with impunity. And I told them if it turned out that as I thought, that there was engagement in our elections, that I'd respond.
So there you have it from Biden. A lot of nothing in his statement. Of course, I was very respectful. I talked respectfully with Putin, which is interesting when Biden talks respectfully with Putin and, goes and brags about how respectful the conversation was. Nobody suggests that that's because he's a puppet of Vladimir Putin, and they use the same line of reasoning with his predecessor. But nonetheless, he says a whole bunch of, I was nice and respectful, and we have to respect each other and all this. But without any evidence, I'm going to levy a massive number of sanctions on Russia. Again, they pulled this in 2016 and they couldn't find any interference. And again, they've gone full bore in the, Russia interfered in the election without any proof of that. And so the result of this latest round of sanctions, and they include other things along with election interference. So I have this article here from Reuters titled U.S. imposes wide array of sanctions on Russia for malign actions. I'm going to use this to go through some of the new announcements that we have. Aggressive U.S. policy here against Russia. They claim that the sanctions are a response to, again, the election interference and for cyber hacking, bullying Ukraine, and other malign actions. The cyber hacking, they say, is in relation to solar winds. We've talked about this on the show in the past with Dave DeCamp, news editor at antiwar.com, who explained that the solar winds so-called hack, one of the ways that the hack could have occurred was by the password being SolarWinds123 and posted on GitHub in the public where anybody could access it. And so there's plenty of other reasons for that. The other malign activities, of course, include things like the alleged Bounty Gate scandal, where they claim that the Russia was paying bounties to Afghans, Taliban, to kill Americans, which it turned out, and I talked about on Friday's show, that now even the intelligence community doesn't assess that as true. And so it's really disturbing that they would use that to justify this action against Russia when our own intelligence community doesn't believe it. Of course, again, when Trump does anything against the intelligence community, he's completely, it's why doesn't he believe his own intelligence? It's probably because he's a puppet of Vladimir Putin. And when, Biden goes against the intelligence community, nobody even mentions it at all. So let's get into some of this. The U.S. expelled some Russian diplomats in the U.S. and blocked U.S. banks from buying bonds from the Russian central bank, and this will be effective June 14th. Now, I want to make clear, because I thought this was an interesting development in the whole thing, that the U.S. banks will still be able to buy Russian bonds. They just won't be able to buy them from the Russian central bank, and so it'll take a jump. Then Biden signed an executive order saying that they can sanction any sector of the Russian economy they believe is involved in election interference, which, again, this is all baseless and proofless, so it could be essentially anything that they want to sanction Russia for. They blacklisted 32 Russian companies or entities. 8 other Russians were sanctioned, along with Canada, the UK, Australia, and the EU, over the alleged theft of Crimea, which of course Russia would say was an annexation that was supported by most of the people of Crimea after the U.S. Not only effectively aided and midwifed a coup in that country, but that coup was really a part of a nation building effort where they were looking to restructure how the Ukrainian government and society worked. And there's a really good episode with Mark Sloboda on Redlines. That's Anya Parenpil's podcast at the Gray Zone, on just how much they were trying to change Ukraine during that coup. After the announcement of the sanctions, the Russian economy dipped 2%. Biden also declared the Russian threat a national emergency. This article, reprinted at antiwar.com by Rick Roseroff. Biden declares national emergency. U.S. and NATO brand Russia an international pariah. And they, basically just claim that Russia's a threat to our national, which, in a sense, it is the other nuclear armed superpower, and we have made an enemy out of Russia, especially over the past couple decades. But at the same time, there's no more Russian threat to the U.S. mainland than there ever has been. And so I think it's just a way, mainly to stoke fear and increase tensions. Now, Russia has responded by expelling 10 American diplomats. I believe that's the same number that the U.S. had expelled. And there are now 450 diplomats in each country. So the U.S. has, 450 American diplomats, Russia 450 here. Although Russia would point out that 150 of those diplomats are here because that's where the UN is located. And, they should actually have more diplomats in the U.S. because not all their diplomats, about a third of them, are doing work with the UN and not with the US. And then one of the other things we have going on with Russia, I want to clarify a story we talked about last week, which was the U.S. had planned to deploy 2 more warships to the Black Sea. It has now canceled those plans. According to the U.S., this actually wasn't a plan. It was they asked permission from Turkey to be able to move the warships into the Black Sea, but they just asked permission. They weren't planning on doing it. It's unclear if that's actually the case or just what the U.S. is saying now, that they ended up in a situation where Russia was threatening to close off a portion of the Black Sea near their bases to the U.S. ships because of what was happening. So we had that walked back by the U.S. In Iraq, U.S. and Turkish soldiers came under some fire in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, Erbil here. A drone dropped explosives near U.S. forces stationed at the Erbil airport in northern Iraq. And I thought this was really worth mentioning because it was essentially a drone attack. I mean, it wasn't a, guided Hellfire missile, but rather, a drone. Some guy was able to press a button and have like a claw release a bomb or something like that. But nonetheless, these kind of attacks seem to be getting more sophisticated. There was also a Turkish soldier who was killed in a attack. I believe it was by some kind of suicide drone type situation that ended up killing the Turkish soldier in that region. The last story I have for today, and I know this will be a shorter show today, everyone. I promise I will have plenty of content this week with the interview and the great stuff I have coming up. But the U.S. has also imposed sanctions now on Uganda over what they call undermining the Ugandan election. They're not going to allow people who they say undermine the election travel to the U.S. This is a way to make sure that anybody who is in Uganda who comes to the U.S. is the people who espouse the beliefs in align with the U.S. position. And so I think it could be pretty nefarious in that way. And of course, what business does the U.S. have in the Ugandan election? That's for the people of Uganda to decide how that goes and how that works out. And, this is one of those cases where maybe the Trump administration would have been a little bit better just because they seem not to be able to respond to all these different events, whether that was, disorganization or not caring about those countries. But that kind of influences almost better than being involved and caring, like so many of the Biden administration officials would claim they would, when that ends up leading to more military intervention, sanctions and stuff like that. So that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today, everyone. I hope you're enjoying it. Share the show. You find video versions at YouTube and at Odyssey. Check out the show on all of our social media accounts, Twitter, at @con_interest, Facebook, and me. We are just, search it up. You can find it, Conflicts of Interest. Donate to the show at Patreon or at Subscribestar. And then check out all my work at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle. Thanks, everybody. I'll be back with 2 more shows this week, including the 100th episode.